the right one. Right there, sir. Senator, pleasure. Tony Katz, how are you?
Tony, great to be with you.
It's good to be with you. We're going to talk right into this microphone. First of all, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Good to see you in Columbus.
Tony, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about a couple things. First, from your speech today here, you talked flat tax, which I was kind of surprised. I don't know how many people get into the difference between flat tax and fair tax. Give us your thoughts. What do you see as the fundamental difference there, and why you think it's important to be able to do your taxes on a postcard?
Well, listen, when it comes to the fair tax and flat tax, I support both. I think the fair tax is the optimum tax system. I'm an original co-sponsor of the fair tax in the United States Senate. If I could push a button sitting here right at the table today and change our tax system, I would change it to the fair tax. Now, that being said, I think we've got some more distance to travel before we get there. I think we've got a lot more education and explaining to do to the American people, and I think that's going to take some time. So I am campaigning on a flat tax, a simple flat tax where every American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard.
What is that percentage?
We have not rolled out the specific numbers in our tax plan. We are working with our economic team to do so. We will in the coming months. What I've said is that it should be so simple it should be on a postcard, and that we should abolish the IRS. And so once we do that, I believe that's achievable. I believe that's achievable in the next 4 years. Once we do that, then I intend to continue working to go down the journey towards a fair tax. But I think a flat tax is much more achievable as an interim step in the short term.
So it's not an either or. It's a step A to step B.
Exactly.
There you are yesterday in Iowa. I don't mean to date the conversation here. You got a pork chop in one hand, and there's Ellen Page, actress and LGBT activist, and you begin on a dissertation of what religious liberty is all about. And in Indiana, with what we've dealt with religious freedom, the RFRA, what we're dealing with in towns like Carmel, Indiana, where I personally have spoken out against it, not on the religious freedom behalf, but on the constitutionality of some of these pieces of legislation that are coming forward, you give a dissertation that's a knockout. Tell me equal in the United States.
Well, Tony, thank you very much. It was an interesting exchange. I was not familiar with Ms. Page. I didn't know who she was, but she asked some questions, and I was happy to engage with her. And religious liberty for me has been a lifelong passion. This is not some newly discovered issue when the presidential campaign was launched, as it sometimes is the case with some candidates. For more than 2 decades, I've been fighting for religious liberty. When I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, we successfully defended the Ten Commandments monument on the state capitol grounds. We won 5-4. We successfully defended the Pledge of Allegiance, the words "One Nation Under God." We won unanimously in front of the Supreme Court. And in private practice, I represented over 3 million veterans defending the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, a lone white Latin cross erected to honor the men and women who gave their lives in World War I, and we won 5-4 before the U.S. Supreme Court. So this has been a long and a personal battle. When it comes to religious liberty, Indiana has been ground zero. I have said many, many times, I think the battle in Indiana that put your state front and center and ripped many people apart, I think that battle in Indiana was, as Reagan said, were nowhere to be found. An awful lot of those candidates chose that exact moment to go rearrange their sock drawers. I'll tell you, for me at least, religious liberty is a fundamental commitment. And in fact, last night in Iowa, we did a rally in support of religious liberty. We had over 2,500 people come to the rally. It was the single largest political rally in Iowa this year. And what we did is we had heroes from across the country come and tell their stories about how they stood for their faith and were persecuted. And it was powerful. I would encourage your listeners, if you go to our website, tedcruz.org.
You got to say it 3 times, otherwise it doesn't count. It's like on the Candy Man.
tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org.
There it is.
If you go there, I would encourage you to watch the Religious Liberty Rally. There was not a dry eye in that auditorium listening to these stories of heroes, listening to Dick and Betty Odgaard, a wonderful Iowa couple who own an historic Lutheran church, who were driven out of business because they were unwilling to celebrate a same-sex wedding. It was against their faith. They're devout Mennonites. They were sued. They were driven out of business. They've had to lay off their employees. Melissa and Aaron Klein, a baker from Oregon, driven out of business again because she was unwilling to celebrate a same-sex wedding.
But your point to Ellen Page was that she even said that a gay florist should have to do the wedding for a Christians who thought that she was that florist was the worst person in the world. She thought that should happen. You said, no, the religious liberty should still hold.
We live in a pluralistic society that respects diversity. Nobody has the right to force someone else to embrace and celebrate their lifestyle. And so the example I gave is I asked Ms. Page, I said, imagine a gay florist. I know that's hard to imagine, but go with the hypo.
That's awesome, by the way. You could feel the sarcasm actually hit me in the face.
And imagine this florist was asked to provide flowers at the wedding of two fundamentalist Christians. And if that florist said, you know what, I don't share your faith, I disagree with it, I don't want to provide those flowers, that is the florist's right. Likewise, we don't have any right to force a Jewish rabbi to perform a Christian wedding ceremony any more than we have a right to force a Muslim imam to perform a Jewish wedding ceremony. Let me give another example that I didn't give to Miss Page, but I'd be curious to see how she would answer it. Does she think that an African-American baker should be forced to bake a cake for a Klan rally celebration? Now, I have an answer to that. My answer is hell no. That every one of us has a right to live according to our faith and conscience. But there is this liberal tyranny, this liberal fascism, where they don't only want to do what they want to do, but they want to punish and drive out of business anyone who dares have a different view. One of the people who spoke at our religious liberty rally was the former fire chief in Atlanta, Chief Cochran. He's an African-American, incredibly distinguished man. He was fired. Now, do you know why he was fired? Because he wrote a Christian devotional book in his own free time, had nothing to do with the job. He wrote a Christian devotional book, and in it, one page of the book discussed human sexuality and laid out the biblical teachings on homosexuality. Because he dared repeat what the Bible says, he was fired from his job as the fire chief of Atlanta. We heard from another soldier, Sergeant Monk, 19-year veteran of the military, who was forcibly retired because his commanding officer, who was an open homosexual, asked his views, what are your views on marriage? And he said, ma'am, I'm not going to tell you that because they would cause division. He was forcibly retired for refusing to
answer the question?
Refusing to answer the question. She interrogated him, and unless he embraced her radical views, there is an assault on faith. And in our Constitution, there's a reason why religious liberty is the first liberty protected in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. It's what our framers call the very first liberty. Everything else is dependent on the right of every American to worship God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, free of the government getting in the way.
I know you got to run, Senator Ted Cruz, but I got to ask because we are big sports fans in Indianapolis. Texans or Cowboys, sir? Texans or Cowboys?
That's easy. I'm a Houstonian, I'm a Texans fan, I'm an Astros fan, I'm especially a Rockets fan.
The correct answer was the Indianapolis Colts. I'm sorry you got that wrong, but next time, Senator Ted Cruz, an absolute pleasure having a chance to speak to you today. Best of luck.
Take care. God bless.